So much on my mind, keep it all in line, juggling tasks that fall from the sky. Oh, what a scene, somewhere on this road, there is a load that's lighter for me. Show me the road that's lighter for me.
Welcome to episode 13 of Chaos to Calm. I'm your host, Noelle Kirshner. I'm a minister, mother of three, and writer. I've written for places like Crosswalk, The Huffington Post, and Encourage, and I've also recently published a new book on life purpose. On the show, I like exploring how faith can help us move from chaos to calm. Back to school is often a chaotic time. With the pandemic, it's even more so. My guests will share practical tips for navigating this unprecedented season. Plus, my guests are the authors of a new devotional for tween girls. It's hard to imagine a more challenging time to raise young girls. With WAP on the radio and Netflix airing the controversial film Cuties, the lifeline that my guests can offer is timely through faith. I am delighted to welcome via Zoom Proverbs 31 speaker and author Lynn Cowell and professional counselor Michelle Nietert. I met Lynn years ago at a Proverbs 31 She Speaks conference. Michelle is a fellow Crosswalk contributor and mother of grade school children. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out details about a giveaway. Hi, welcome Michelle and Lynn to this episode of Chaos to Come. It is such a delight to have you with me. Thank you for making time out of your busy schedules and busy day, I understand.
Thank you for having us. We're so excited to be here with you.
Well, I wanted to start the conversation with a topic that I think is on every parent's mind, and that is COVID-19 and the back to school anxieties that I think so many families are facing. And I love the fact that, Michelle, you're in Texas, Lynn, you're in North Carolina, correct?
Right.
And I'm in New Jersey, and I feel like the plans for going back to school is not only different from state to state, but they're different from school to school. And so really, parents across the country are looking for guidance and comfort in this uncertain time. So Michelle, given your background in counseling, I was wondering if you have a word for families right now. What would you say to parents who are trying to best come alongside and support their children at this confusing and liminal time?
I think as I've talked to parents around the country, they are very concerned about their children's education and making the right decision. And I want to encourage them to let go of that idea, because I don't think there's a right decision, because we don't know the future and how this is going to look and how each child's going to adapt. So I think what we can do is to gather information and make the best decision we can for our children. And I truly believe we may be raising the most resilient generation we've ever seen. We definitely have some fragile ones that have floated by that we're still working with in the counseling centers on failure to launch or getting better ready to launch or something like that, or relaunching. And so I think these kids, having faced a difficult time in learning like flexibility and learning adaptability at such a young age, could be really great for them as they move forward. It may not be as detrimental as we're worried that it's going to be. I also, as a previous reading specialist and public educator, I truly believe every kid's going to read. Like, nobody's not going to learn to read because of COVID. I believe kids are going to graduate. They're going to go on and develop vocational lifestyles and careers. All those things are going to happen. I think we as parents do want to look, though, at their development and also some of the mental health aspects of managing anxiety. If you have a highly anxious child, being in that school setting and trying to deal with the mask and all the new types of routines they're having to do may not be ideal for them. But you also have to weigh that against what's best for your family if you've got parents working at home and that child's not going to get the education and attention they need. I think also for online kids, we have to think about, is my child independent enough to be that kind of learner? Because it takes a type of kid that can do that unless you're going to stop what you're doing to really manage them. And I know my sister-in-law has twin kindergartners last spring, and she had to do that. She was supposed to be starting a new job, and she just said, there's no way. And I've lost an assistant because they've got some very big risk factors. And I think that's an important question too, is all of us have to weigh our risk, and it's different for each family. Some of us have elderly people in the home. Some of us have autoimmune issues that make a difference in our choices. And so I don't think there's one right choice for any one family. There are different choices. I always say, when my kids say, why can't we do that? I say, because we're Nieterts, and that's just not something we do. And they're like, but the Smiths do that. And I'm like, that is fine for the Smiths. That might be right for them. It's just not right for the Nieterts. And so I really teach them that idea that God has a purpose for our family, and we might be in a different lane than another family. And that doesn't mean we're judging them. That just means that God is leading them in a different path, maybe, in that process. And so I think it's really important for parents to just hold on to hope in the midst of this, and also hold on to their kids. Check in with them as a mental health professional, see how they're sleeping, see when the last time they've cried is, check on their socialization, make sure they're getting socialization somehow. Some of those important physical movement, those important, like we used to walk to school. Some of us aren't walking to school. Our kids still need to be moving because it's part of their brain development. And it's really good even for our parent. I know for me, it's really good for my mom mental health. So I think all of those are factors in this, but I really want to offer some hope. I think a lot of parents are really worried. At the same time, I want to tell parents, advocate for your kids. Advocate for your kids if they have special needs. And it's hard for the schools to meet some of those needs right now, but you need to ask. Worst thing that can happen is they can say no. So advocate for your kids. And then also, I think it's really important that, we realize we can make another choice down the road if it's not the right choice. I have a friend who just pulled her kid from school and decided that the online school wasn't working. And so she's homeschooling, but we're still staying. We created a cohort together, a COVID cohort. We decided to keep our boys who are a little anxious at home. But they are socializing together. So we have opened our COVID circle just a tiny bit to socialize our kids. And I had to do that for my 13-year-old extrovert because she was getting severely depressed. And so her circle's got about 4 girls in it.
So what would you say the signs of depression are to watch for, Michelle? Because I think that's in the background of every parent's mind. What should I be concerned about if I see it?
She was highly irritable, like beyond middle school brain irritable was one sign. And then I asked her one day, when is the last time you cried? And she looked at me and said, Mom, I cry almost every day in my room. And I'm like, and I'm a counselor. How many days have you cried? Like 2 weeks in a row. So at that point, her dad and I needed to talk about some options for her because the level of which we were sheltering in was not working for her soul and the way God made her to work. And then she was also like sleeping weird. Sometimes sleeping too much. Sometimes she said she was waking up in the middle of the night. And then I know this is a really strange thing. I've never said this yet on a show, but my daughter has on her own figured out something that we mental health professionals know. And that's if you move for 15 to 20 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week, it's as effective as a low dose of an anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication. Or if you take a hot bath, it's as effective. And I just noticed the number of baths she was taking was increasing greatly. So I knew that was an indication because of how she copes that this was really creating a lot of stress for her. So we really looked at like rollerblades and skateboards to get them moving again. And then we also looked at what we could do to create more socialization. And I went out in a pasture with a bunch of moms with our backs of our vans up and, let the girls stay far apart, but let them see each other and act as goofy as, 13-year-old girls do.
Well, it is important, I think, to get creative about communicating and connecting because there's really no risk-free choice for anyone. Every situation has its own risks, right? And isolation, from what I hear you saying, certainly has its own risks. It's felt like a catch-22 as a parent when my children were online virtually learning, where on the one hand, the computer is their way to connect with their friends, but on the other hand, we had always been in a position where we were trying to limit screen time and to really hone in on a more in-person style of communicating. So what would you say to a parent who's feeling conflicted about the lifeline that the computer and virtual learning space can offer a child, but they're wanting to do it safely for the good of the child's development as well?
I think one of the things that can really help is that because they're online so much when it comes to school, is what can you do that is not connected to school, that is doing some of these things that Michelle has talked about? Can they come up with a new hobby? Can they begin to expand learning something new? Last night I was watching the news, and there was a story about a young man who was making desks for other kids. And, he was like 15 years old. And that just made me so happy because he was learning a new skill and he was helping people. So, find some time to help our kids learn some new things about themselves, new talents, take new adventures. My husband and I spend a lot of time hiking, getting out and doing something different that is away from the screen when the screen isn't needed.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of new hobbies, new opportunities to grow as a person and discover who you are.
Mm-hmm. I do want to give permission, though, for parents during this time to allow children to have social interaction if they're completely isolating on their screens, because that is part of peer development in the adolescent age range. I never dreamed I'd be saying to my child, just get on FaceTime and talk to your friends. That was not something I'd ever dreamed I'd be saying. But as we were sheltering in much tighter before book release, because I did not want to get sick, and it didn't go very well. I still caught something, but I didn't catch COVID, so that was good. But it's really important that we teach our kids anyway. I'm a huge advocate of not anti-screens, but purpose-filled screens. Mm-hmm. So I use a screen to encourage other people. I use a screen to share God's love with other people. I use a screen in some pretty positive ways, I feel like, to inform parents and educate them as well. And so I think one thing I've tried to really instill in my daughter, as she did get access to social media this year, is what will you do with Instagram? Will it be all about you? Or will it also be about cheering on, not that it's not ever going to be not at all, but will it be about cheering people on? Would it be about you sharing a worship song since you're a worship leader and sharing the gospel that way? Would it be about when your friends post, you being as intentional about encouraging and cheering them on as you are about wanting them to interact with you? So I think that screens can be used for my son uses it for education. He's learning coding. His dad's a tech geek, and I think I've got another one that's grooming up here. And he also socializes with other boys while he plays games on the screen. And I think all of those are fine purposes that we don't have to be terrified of.
I like what you're saying, Michelle, because I certainly have one of my 3 sons who operates that way on a screen as well. And for him, coding is a way that he can learn and grow and develop his talent, like you were saying, Lynn. But I like how you weaved in Instagram to your answer, Michelle, because something that I'm seeing, and I know many parents are aware of, is the underpinning of hypersexualization on social media, particularly as it relates to young girls. We've certainly had some things in the news come up recently that have been alarming for so many parents, particularly parents who have a faith background. I'm thinking of the song WAP, which I don't even like to say the name of the title, but it deals with a profane acronym for female lubrication. It's on the Billboard Top 100 hit list for 5 weeks now, #1 position currently. And the song, the video rather, Cuties, that has been on Netflix of late and has been having a lot of controversy surrounding it because it's the hypersexualization of young girls. In this instance, we're talking 11-year-old girls. So as young girls see these images and hear this song on the radio, and certainly their friends are listening to it, what would you say to a parent who does want to redeem the social media space and the messages that their daughters are hearing, and even their sons, on those different channels?
You know, one of the things I think that as parents that we can't forget is that while the culture has a lot of power, so do we. And our children are listening to us. They may give us a little flack or send body language that says they're not, but they are. And the messages that we're speaking and sharing with them, they hear. My daughters are now 23 and 26. And even to this day, they'll tease around and say, well, you know, mom wouldn't let us watch that movie, or mom wouldn't let us, you know, listen to those songs. Or sometimes on the way to school, even as a song was playing, I was pointing out to them, you know, do you hear what she's saying, where her worth is coming from? And obviously I was totally annoying to some degree, but here they are at 23 and 26 telling me that they were hearing what I was saying to them. And I was teaching them what the song really meant. And so, you know, there's a fine line there, you know, between, you know, getting too much up in their face, but also being a voice that is heard in their life. Because again, no matter what their body language is saying or their words are saying, that they are hearing what we are saying to them. And I like to think of it as, I once heard somebody say that what we are putting into our kids' lives are like suitcases in a trunk of a car. Your kid might not be pulling that trunk out, that suitcase out right now, but at some point down the road, they're going to need what you have poured into their heart and the truth that you've poured into their life. And when they are pulled over on the side of the road, or they're in an accident, or they've hit a guardrail, that truth is there. And that's what I'm counting on in the lives of my kids, that from little on, I've poured that truth in, and that will be there for them.
Lynn, I love that. That's so powerful. I mean, what I hear you saying is that we as parents offer an alternative lens to culture, which really is something that faith offers all of us, but we have to be immersed in it to allow it to inform our vision. And just like repetitive parental messages, keep immersing ourselves in the way the gospel tells us to think about the world and these different challenges to, frankly, healthy development as I see it in kids. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add to what Lynn said?
Yes, I think that as we look at these things, that not only teaching our kids, and I want to reinforce what Lynn just said, though, in one way. As the previous safe and drug-free school counselor for a school district of over 13,000, the research still shows that parents are the number one influence on a child's life. When we look at the drug surveys, when we look at all the federal work that's being done with these kids, and they admit to smoking pot, drinking alcohol, having sex, whatever it is, they're still saying that their parents' voices really do matter. So they may not look like they're listening, but I also want to remind you they're watching you too. So when you grab a drink to curb your emotion, when you watch something that is not very appropriate and they're like hearing it upstairs or downstairs or whatever the case may be, you're sending messages as well. What I like to do, and I just did this, funny that you mentioned Cuties. We were on Netflix. My daughter and I were sitting there. We were looking at something to watch, and it popped up as one of the ads that was going with, like, you know, new. And I said, what do you think about what I would say about that show? So I love to ask the coaching question instead of teaching, especially once we're 13 and above. I feel like I should have done my job to some degree by now. And they usually know what I'm going to say anyway, so I don't want to bore them with it. She said, well, you would say to me that women should not be appreciated for just their bodies. And what I'm seeing on the screen is not very appropriate because you would never let me dress that way out in public. And so it's probably not something I would need to watch because I also might compare my body to theirs, and God didn't make all bodies the same. And that's a very specific body for gymnastics and things like that as well. Because as an eating disorder specialist, that's been a message that I'm not only sharing with my daughter, but her friends and other people, because it's so important that we as women not look at one body type, which Hollywood likes a lot of times, and think there's something wrong with us if ours does not look that way. And certainly we don't want them restricting food and things like that to try to get there.
I love that you bring up eating disorders because I do feel that it is a threat for young girls. Because your new devotion, which I'm so excited about, is addressed to young girls, could you say a little more about the specific issues that you wanted to address and empower girls against in the devotional? Eating disorders hopefully would be one. I love your words about that, but what else?
So before Michelle and I began to write Loved and Cherished, one of the things I did was just research on the position of a father being in the home, whether absent or not engaged, and just the outcomes that that has in a girl's life. And so the heartbeat behind why we started this book was to teach a girl that she is loved and cherished by her Father, God, and to build that strong foundation. So as she moves toward middle school, when these various types of pressures and especially as her body begins to change and comparison really starts to kick in, that she has a foundation that she is absolutely loved and cherished exactly the way she is. She's loved, period. There isn't anything that she can add to it, and there's nothing that she can do to take away from it. So that was the foundation that we were writing from as we wrote this devotion together.
I love that idea. The beauty of the perfect parent, our Heavenly Father, is that it kind of takes us off the hook. Not every child has a perfect upbringing, certainly, but our job isn't necessarily that we have to be perfect, right? Our job is to point to the perfect parent, and it's a gift. It's a gift for children in their life, and it's a gift for parents, because we're doing our job so long as we're pointing them to the one who is all things for them. And I love what you are saying, Lynn. So certainly pointing a child toward God, addressing the insecurities. We talked a little bit about social media. We talked about eating disorders. Are there any other particular issues that young girls, you believe, face in our culture or society today?
I love that we've addressed in multiple places in this book worry and anxiety, because that's so prevalent in our kid culture. Right now the research is 1 in 4 kids will have a mental health diagnosis by the time they're 18. And anxiety is one of the most prevalent. I know, it's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm a little scared because that was kind of close to the adult statistics. And the adults with COVID, right now we've got 1 in 3 reporting signs of clinical depression. So they have escalated for them. And we don't have the research left yet on the kids. It's coming, I have no doubt. The National Institute of Mental Health just released that to us therapists this last week. And so when we see this adult increase, even having a depressed adult in the home is going to make a child more at risk for symptomology. So it's really important that we have addressed this idea that God is the lifter of your head, that God would sing over you, that we can cast our worries before God. In fact, I'll go ahead and get it out. I just noticed I saw it. At our online camp, we made these little worry gobblers that were the kids, like God could gobble up their worries by putting them inside here. And obviously this was for girls because of the way it looks. And you don't have to get this fancy. You could use like a worry jar or something like that. And we have instructions for that on my website, yourmentalhealthcoach.com. But we want to make this book not only spiritual, but practical too. And even the fact that we've put in journaling places, because the research says that if you write your worries out, you shrink them because you become bigger than them. But when they stay in your head, they can even start filtering down into your heart. And then that's where the anxiety kicks in, because anxiety is energy and motion in our body, and we've got to get it out. And so we just tried to think of really practical ways to do that as we wrote the different parts to the section Choosing to be Cherished. We wanted to give girls ideas like, bring an inanimate object. Maybe it's a heart, and it's like, you're carrying God in your pocket to remind you of his presence every day. Just simple ways that we could make this super. I think as a therapist, that's the thing I worry about. Sometimes church gives great teaching, but the kids don't know how to take that teaching and stick it into their morning routine, their bedtime routine, or maybe even their school day. As a school counselor, I noticed that. And so I was just trying to think about how can we equip, and as a counselor who offers faith-based counseling upon request, how can we infuse God into their lives and into this process?
I love that idea of a concrete action to back up what we learn in the devotion and in our faith. It brings me back to a time when I was on a youth mission trip, and I was told to pray my concerns into a rock and to throw it as far as I could away from me. And that simple act of just being separate from that anxiety was very powerful. And that's what I hear you saying with the writing of anxieties. Really being able to separate yourself from that and to give it over, whether it's giving it over on the page or give it over to God by throwing it as far away from you as possible. There's therapy in that.
Absolutely. You're casting your cares upon him. And that is what we want kids to do. We want them to let go of those cares, because if they don't, we call it with the little ones a worry dragon. If they feed the worry dragon, it will grow huge and it will grow bigger than them. And a lot of kids who come into our office, that's what they've happened with, if they're having panic attacks or they're not wanting to go to school because of social anxiety. So we really want to help them shrink that worry dragon. And the good news is I've yet to meet a worry dragon that was bigger than God.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. Well, I'm thinking about to a parent who wants to put these practical tips into practice. And I know for myself, I try to start the day with a devotion with my boys before they go to school. But what can we do as parents to make a devotional more effective, to make faith a practical thing, particularly when people feel cut off from their congregations and perhaps worshiping together in this pandemic time?
As you have shared about having that devotion time, at the same time, we know that parents are under such extreme pressure, especially if you have two working parents in the home. So you're also talking about, how finding a way to make the time to do these kinds of things. So when Michelle and I wrote Loved and Cherished, one of the things we did was we made them short. So you can read it in 3 minutes. So you could read it on your way to the grocery store, or, if your child is going to go to school, or before they go to bed. And then as far as the practical piece, there is the Living Cherished section in each part. And, you can challenge your child to do that application alone, or you can do it together as a family, to show them these aren't just words that we read, but they're things that we do in order to incorporate God's love and his joy and his kindness into our everyday lives.
I love that, Lynn. So as a mom of 3 boys, I'm wondering, do you have a next devotion coming out that will be for boys, or do you recommend that your devotional would be applicable to the other gender, or what plans do you have for future publications?
What do you think, Michelle? My son's 29.
I know. Mine is 10, and I have actually had an entire Christian school of male teachers offer to be my beta group and tell me everything I need to know and write about for boys. And I love treating boys. They're different, and they have different concerns than the way they approach things as well. So I have a feeling if it's not boys, it might be kids. I think we're kind of thinking, we've been talking about, we don't want to give it away yet, but we are working on something on, like, maybe that has to do with emotions in kids, because kids struggle with managing their emotions. To me, it's very critical that we figure that out. One of the practical things I wanted to mention that Lynn talks about usually, but she didn't mention today, is she did breakfast with Jesus with her kids. And I think that applies to boys too, is just while they're eating, and you're sitting there with them or you're hovering over them, fill their hearts while they're filling their bellies.
Mm-hmm. Well, filling their bellies is a big part of boy life. I can definitely attest. So I think that that's a good tip. And while I do have 3 boys, I am a woman, and I feel so passionate about using our voice as women to help girls who are still developing theirs. And I think if we don't respect ourselves, we can't ask anybody else to respect us. And I think that our girls need to know that. They need to respect themselves and to honor their worth from God. And when they know it, that's the most attractive thing, I think. Yes. Thank you so much, Lynn and Michelle, for being with us today. I'm so grateful for your wisdom. Best of luck in your new book, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you again to Lynn and Michelle for being with us today. If you'd like to win a free copy of their devotional, visit my website for details and register at www.noelkirshner.com. Until next time, may calm be with you.